The untold story of King George I, the king who couldn't speak English. Imagine a young boy, raised in the shadow of towering expectations, caught in a whirlwind of family feuds, power struggles, and scandalous secrets. How did this boy, born in a small German duchy, rise to become the King of Great Britain? Why was his marriage so disastrous that it became a royal scandal whispered about in every court? And what about the mysterious prison sentence of his wife? This is not just the tale of King George I, it's the making of a monarch. We'll uncover the fierce rivalries of his youth, the unbreakable ambition of his mother Sophia, and the dangerous game of primogeniture that saw siblings fighting for titles and fortunes. And when destiny came knocking with the Hanoverian succession, how did George navigate his way to a throne over 700 miles from home, ruling a land whose language he barely spoke? Prepare for shocking twists, sibling betrayals, and a king with a German accent who changed the course of British history forever. Curious about how a king born in Hanover became the face of British monarchy? Stay with us. This story is as dramatic as it is entertaining. It all began in Hanover, a city in north-central Germany that was then part of the Duchy of Brunswick-Lüneburg. On the 28th of May 1660, a boy was born who would one day swap bratwurst for the British crown. This boy, named George Ludwig, was the first child of Ernest Augustus, the Duke of Brunswick-Lüneburg, and Sophia of the Palatinate, a woman with more royal connections than a medieval LinkedIn profile. Ernest Augustus was no ordinary duke. He held titles like Prince Bishop of Osnabrück, a role that allowed him to combine a priestly lifestyle with the occasional sword fight. In 1692, he leveled up to Prince Elector of Hanover, giving him a critical vote in choosing the Holy Roman Emperor. Think of him as part of a very exclusive club of German aristocrats who had the power to pick the emperor, but mostly used their influence to feud with each other. Sophia, George's mother, was the daughter of Elizabeth Stuart, known as the Winter Queen for her fleeting reign in Bohemia, and Frederick V, the Elector Palatine. Sophia's family tree was a tangled web of European royalty, connecting her to England, Scotland, Ireland, and even the Danish royal family. Her marriage to Ernest Augustus in 1658 was a strategic move, not a romantic fairy tale. Together they created a powerhouse family that would leave a lasting impact on Europe. George was the eldest of 7 children, which meant a lot of sibling drama. His younger brothers, notably Frederick Augustus, born in 1661, were never destined to inherit much. In a time when primogeniture, the system where the eldest son inherited everything, was still being debated in Hanover, the division of estates was a real possibility. This medieval custom often left younger sons with little more than a title and a sword, which might explain why most of George's brothers pursued military careers. George's childhood was surprisingly warm for a 17th-century aristocrat. His mother doted on him and his siblings, though George wasn't the obvious favorite. Even as a boy, he displayed the qualities of a future leader: responsibility, sobriety, and a knack for not getting into too much trouble. He received a solid education, mastering German, French, and Latin, though his true passions lay in hunting and riding. These hobbies endeared him to his father, who shared his love for outdoor pursuits. At the tender age of 15, George began his military career, joining his father in campaigns during the Franco-Dutch War. By 1679, he was officially recognized as Duke of Hanover, cementing his status as the heir apparent. His military exploits continued, and in 1683, George found himself part of one of Europe's most dramatic moments, the Battle of Vienna. By the late 17th century, the Ottoman Empire was expanding aggressively into Europe. In 1683, Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha led an army of 150,000 men to besiege Vienna, the heart of the Austrian Habsburgs Empire. The city's defense was perilously weak, but a grand alliance of Christian states, led by John III Sobieski of Poland, rallied to its aid. Hanover sent troops and George fought bravely in the climactic Battle of Vienna on September 12, 1683, where the Christian forces decisively defeated the Ottomans. This victory not only halted Ottoman expansion, but also marked George as a capable military leader. He and his brothers continued to fight against the Turks in subsequent campaigns, solidifying their family's reputation. Back in Hanover, George's marital life was less triumphant. In 1682, he married his first cousin, Sophia Dorothea, in a union arranged to consolidate family lands and wealth. While this seemed like a sensible political move, it was anything but a love match. The marriage produced two children, George Augustus, born in 1683, and Sophia Dorothea, born in 1687. Their son, George Augustus, would later become King George II of Britain, while their daughter married into the Prussian royal family, becoming the mother of Frederick the Great. However, the marriage was doomed from the start. Sophia Dorothea's life ended in scandal and tragedy, as she was later imprisoned for alleged adultery. In the political realm, the family's fortunes were on the rise. Hanover became a prince-electorate in 1692, elevating its status within the Holy Roman Empire. This made Ernest Augustus one of the 9 electors responsible for choosing the Holy Roman Emperor, a role that had significant political clout. By this time, the Holy Roman Empire was a fragmented patchwork of states, ranging from powerful duchies like Hanover to tiny free cities and ecclesiastical territories. Religious divisions, Protestant, Catholic, and Calvinist, added another layer of complexity, a legacy of the 30 Years' War, 1608 to 1648, which had devastated Central Europe. George grew up in this chaotic political landscape, learning the art of diplomacy and war. In the turbulent world of 17th century England, a king named Charles II ascended the throne. Known for his charisma, sharp wit, and a remarkable ability to sire children, though not a single one legitimate, Charles II ruled 3 kingdoms, England, Scotland, and Ireland. Alas, despite fathering over a dozen children with various mistresses, none could inherit the throne, as legitimacy was a non-negotiable prerequisite. When Charles passed away in 1685, the throne passed to his younger brother, James, Duke of York, a man who would find himself caught in the crossfire of religion, politics, and rebellion. James's ascension was problematic from the start. While England had spent the last 150 years firmly embedding Protestantism into its national identity, James was unapologetically Catholic. His coronation sparked a collective Protestant eyebrow raise, but the true trouble began with his governing style. Think my way or the highway, but with added incense. James's heavy-handed attempts to promote Catholicism and centralize power alienated his subjects faster than you could say divine right of kings. By 1688, discontent had brewed into outright rebellion. Protestant nobles, fearing a Catholic dynasty, conspired to oust James in what would be remembered as the Glorious Revolution. Enter Mary, James's Protestant daughter, and her husband, William of Orange, who was not only Dutch, but conveniently Protestant. They were invited to take the throne, and James, sensing the winds of political change, fled to France faster than his powdered wig could catch up. Mary II and William III ruled as a joint monarchy, a unique arrangement that worked well enough, considering neither had any surviving children. Mary died in 1694, followed by William in 1702, leaving the throne to Mary's sister, Anne. Queen Anne's reign would prove to be a tragic tale of hope and loss. Anne, though deeply devoted to her role, suffered a brutal natal history. Pregnant at least 14 times, she endured heartbreak after heartbreak, as nearly all her children died in infancy or early childhood. In 1700, her only surviving child, 11-year-old Prince William, passed away, leaving the nation with no clear Protestant heir. This precarious situation was intolerable to England's Protestants, who shuddered at the idea of James II's Catholic son succeeding Anne. Thus, Parliament passed the Act of Settlement, 1701, effectively barring Catholics from the throne and paving the way for a distant German cousin, George of Hanover. George's connection to the English throne was a genealogical puzzle that traced back to King James I. James's daughter, Elizabeth, married Frederick Futh, Elector Palatine, and one of their children was George's mother, Sophia. Thanks to the Act of Settlement, Sophia and her Protestant descendants became the designated successors. When Sophia died in 1714, George ascended as the Elector of Hanover and the future King of Britain. Before becoming king, George's focus lay on the War of the Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1714, a European conflict sparked by the extinction of Spain's Habsburg royal line. While Hanover played a minor role in the Grand Coalition fighting against French ambitions, George proved an adept military leader, personally campaigning and earning respect as a general. By war's end, Hanover had gained land and prestige, further solidifying George's standing in Europe. Simultaneously, George kept an eye on the Great Northern War, where Sweden, Russia, Denmark, Norway, and Poland-Lithuania clashed for control of the Baltic. George supported Russia and its allies, seeing Swedish dominance as a threat to Hanoverian interests. By 1715, after the Swedish king's death and a string of victories, George emerged with new territories, securing the duchies of Bremen and Verden. When Queen Anne died in August 1714, George's path to the throne was clear. However, his journey to England was anything but swift. News traveled slowly, and preparations for his arrival took weeks. Finally, on September 18th, George landed in Greenwich with an entourage of German nobles, courtiers, and his mistress. Because why not make an impression? 2 days later, George entered London in a grand procession, greeted by over 500,000 curious citizens. It was a seamless transition in theory, but the new king faced significant challenges. For starters, George spoke little English, a glaring oversight for someone who had been in line for the throne for years. While he could converse in French, the lingua franca of European courts, this did little to endear him to his new subjects, many of whom were skeptical of a foreign monarch. Parliament was initially suspicious of this new Hanoverian import, but George proved he had a trick or two up his royal sleeves. In 1721, after a messy financial debacle, the infamous South Sea Bubble, George bowed to pressure and appointed Robert Walpole as the de facto Prime Minister of Britain. Walpole would go on to hold this post for 21 years, cementing his legacy as the longest-serving and possibly most stubborn PM in British history. In 1717, George showed the world he wasn't just about royal feasts and awkward English lessons. He brokered the Triple Alliance between Britain, the Dutch Republic, and France. Imagine a reluctant school reunion where 3 former frenemies, who'd spent decades at war, decided to patch things up for the sake of peace, and possibly the catering. This alliance was less of a ride-or-die pact and more of a please don't fight me while I fix my economy agreement. It worked, though, keeping Europe relatively peaceful until 1740. George's Lutheran faith might have seemed like a safe bet for Protestant England, but the religious landscape was more of a minefield than a meadow. Anglicans thought George might be too radical, while Puritans feared he'd be too soft. George, in a classic can't-please-everyone move, focused on keeping Protestants united against their common foe, Catholicism. Meanwhile, the Peerage Bill of 1719 sparked controversy. Critics accused George of handing out noble titles like party favors, especially to his German pals. Parliament wasn't having it, and the bill was passed to curb such generosity. Even George's son, the future George II, wasn't safe from the drama, clashing with his father over everything from politics to the baptism of his own child. Nothing says family bonding like a near duel at a royal christening. George was an enigma, wrapped in a powdered wig. He barely spoke English when he ascended the throne, and his learning curve was steeper than the Alps. Yet, he devoured English newspapers to see what his subjects thought of him. Spoiler, it wasn't always flattering. Socially awkward in public, George shone in private, telling bawdy jokes and poking fun at himself. While he wasn't a patron of intellectual heavyweights like Newton or Locke, he did support the arts. His court might not have been overflowing with philosophers, but it did feature the legendary composer George Frederick Handel, who became the soundtrack to George's reign. To win over his subjects, George hosted lavish feasts at Hampton Court, complete with hunting trips and evening garden strolls. Guests petitioned him, mingled, and probably enjoyed the royal wine cellar. These events were part PR stunt, part social experiment, and they helped solidify the Hanoverian dynasty's place in Britain. London in the 1710s, a bustling city teeming with merchants, gossipers, and the occasional pickpocket. Into this world struts the South Sea Company, dazzling investors with promises as shiny as a freshly polished doubloon. "We'll make riches trading slaves and spices across the Atlantic," they proclaimed, conveniently omitting the fact that they hadn't earned a single guinea of profit yet. It was a classic case of fake it till you make it, except they didn't make it. By 1720, shares had inflated faster than a hot air balloon, skyrocketing from £100 to nearly £1,000. The rich, the noble, and the foolish all scrambled to buy in. Even the government, led by King George I, gave its blessing, though George likely understood about as much about stocks as a sheep understands algebra. Amidst the frenzy, Parliament passed the Bubble Act, a hilarious piece of legislation designed to prevent speculative bubbles while in the middle of one. Predictably, it popped. By 1721, the shares were worth less than a round at the local tavern, and fortunes evaporated overnight. Lesson learned? Hardly. This was the beginning of England's addiction to speculation, like the tulip mania in the Netherlands, but with fewer flowers and more bankruptcy. While stockbrokers were weeping into their ale, George and his ministers had their sights set on the high seas. Britain's so-called blue water policy was simple: pour money into the Royal Navy and let the cannons do the talking. Spain got a taste of this strategy when they tried to retake Gibraltar and Minorca in the 1720s, only to be met with a resounding "not on our watch" from British warships. The Navy wasn't just a military tool, it was an empire-building juggernaut. From the Caribbean to India, British ships became floating fortresses of imperial ambition. Of course, this policy wasn't George's brainchild. It dated back to Elizabeth I, but the Hanoverians leaned into it like a sailor into a stiff wind. By the end of the century, Britain would rule the waves, though the sailors still grumbled about the food. If the seas were Britain's strength, Ireland was its migraine. The Protestant ascendancy controlled the land, but the Catholic majority remained a restless and oppressed underclass. In 1719, when the Irish House of Lords dared to assert a sliver of independence, George's government smacked them down with the Declaratory Act, reminding Ireland who wore the powdered wig in this relationship. Enter Jonathan Swift, the Dean of Satire and Dublin's sharpest quill. Swift didn't just protest George's policies, he roasted them over a literary fire. His Drapier's letters exposed corruption, particularly the farcical decision to let William Wood mint Irish coins after he bribed George's mistress. Swift's pièce de résistance, a modest proposal, suggested turning Irish children into a culinary delicacy, a satirical masterpiece that still makes readers choke on their tea. Despite his role as King of Britain, George I would have preferred to be Elector of Hanover. The German-speaking monarch often retreated to his homeland, leaving the messy business of governance to his ministers. It was in Hanover where George struck deals like the Treaty of Charlottenburg, forging alliances with Prussia and France while sipping fine Rhine wine. Back in England, his absences raised eyebrows. Critics joked that the king was more interested in bratwurst than British politics. Still, Hanoverian diplomacy laid the groundwork for future alliances that would shape Europe's balance of power. As George aged, he became increasingly disengaged from governance, leaving power in the hands of his trusted Prime Minister, Robert Walpole. In 1725, Walpole introduced the Order of the Bath, a new honor ostensibly created by the king. In reality, it was a clever scheme by Walpole to reward political allies. George, likely indifferent, nodded his approval while enjoying a schnitzel. George I's reign was a paradox. He was a German king ruling a British empire, a monarch who preferred hunting in Hanover to debating in Westminster. Yet his reign marked pivotal moments in history: the rise of British naval dominance, the financial chaos of the South Sea Bubble, and the simmering tensions in Ireland. His legacy, like the man himself, was a mix of triumph and absurdity. So, raise a glass to George I, the reluctant king who steered Britain through bubbles, battles, and biting satire, proving that history is often stranger and funnier than fiction. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through history. But hold on, the story is far from over. If you think George I's reign was fascinating, wait until you meet his successor, George VI, a king whose reign was marked by spectacular events, dramatic battles, and unforgettable intrigue. Imagine a royal court entangled in family feuds, a king leading his army on the battlefield, the last British monarch to do so, and a reign that saw Britain rise to global power. Why did a son rebel against his father? What secrets did this king's victories and controversies hold? And how did his decisions shape the destiny of an empire? You won't want to miss the next chapter of this captivating royal saga. Subscribe to our channel now and turn on the notification bell so you're the first to join us as we unravel the gripping tale of King George II. Trust us, history has never been this thrilling. Don't let it pass you by.